I think what gets me the most about this princess and king dynamic is that it's very similar to that of Jingoji and Tachibana, a very protective father-like figure, and the girl who ultimately ends up revolting and going against the orders. But this time we have it with royalty that can actually up an entire nation into trying to overthrow said king and father. And it was comedy gold to see the escalation of this episode, because truthfully, when you see the king, he's sitting there like an old man at a sauna, just has a towel around his waist, and just the idea of just praising the goddess because of course they would. I thought that would be the absurd story of the episode, like we would just see more really weird shenanigans with the king and the people, and in return we end up with this interesting romance dynamic where Tachibana is talking about how, no, I can't be in love with Jingoji, I like women, actually like her, and then instead of just going with the typical, okay, we have Shen, who has very much, feels like he's putting some moves on Jingoji at times, but at the same time, Jingoji and Tachibana very much have feelings for the other, so that's an unexpected love triangle. You throw in another female into the mix, you basically have a love square. And instead of just simply having something like that, they immediately make her suicidal and she's trying to end her life. And I was like, okay, they're making jokes like this. I wonder what her life is like that she's basically wanting to jump off a bridge, basically. And I love the idea that she just has no freedom since the mother died. They actually added an emotional reason for the rebelling, but rather than just simply keeping it emotional for the sake of having a more serious story, instead, Jingoji ultimately is now sided with the king, who wants to have a strict kind of parental control over his daughter, as you now have Tachibana unexpectedly working with the people and the princess to overthrow the natural rule of order, and that is one of the wildest, that escalated quickly moments I've seen in this show, and honestly this season in anime. That was pure comedy gold, and the party trick just made me think of Aqua, but if it was more effective. The idea that when Jingoji back in his original life was basically pushed off the edge, he ended up blowing fire and setting off the fire alarms. And the idea that this girl is basically saying, you're useless, get the hell out of here, and he summons the door, comes out with a torch as well as some alcohol and breathes fire, and he's like, is that entertaining enough for you, your highness? Holy shit. Just to see the fear in everyone's eyes when this girl is trying to show down towards Jingoji, because we know what type of people Jingoji hates, and this princess is without a doubt the prime example of all the women he hates in the world, and the idea that she's now giving him orders, he ain't having none of that shit. If you're wanting to go with the quote-unquote hero, I'm the quote-unquote hero's weapon, you have to learn to accept me, sort of a thing. And just to see the type of shit that was going on throughout this episode, the idea that she basically announces that she wants to go on an adventure, and he immediately shuts it down absolutely not, because one, he doesn't like women to begin with, and two, he definitely doesn't like this young girl who clearly is going to cause him a headache, and a little bit more than that. But the idea of potentially thinking about most likely, let's say next week, the week after, maybe resolves whatever we're seeing here. If they ended the season somehow with Shen, the princess, Jingoji, and Tachibana all going on an adventure together, that love square is going to be unlike anything we've seen before, because we know the main romance, Jingoji, Tachibana. They both deny their feelings, they try to explain that it's the gender bending that's basically causing it, but ultimately they very much want to get married, want to have kids together. Hell, Jingoji literally fantasized about it in this episode. But then to add Shen to the mix with the confusion of is he actually attracted to Jingoji, or is it just more of the mystery to his character? And add in the princess dynamic with the flirting, that love square is going to be unlike anything we've seen in anime. I really, really hope, based on how they've been escalating this show, and I've heard a lot of good things about this arc, that we do get to see a second season in a couple of years, because I would love to see more of these characters' dynamics, just to see the absurd shit that could actually go on in the future. But in terms of an endgame kind of resolution, potentially overthrowing the kingdom, who literally is worshipping the goddess that you were summoned by, who screwed your life over, and now this kingdom is actually treating you pretty well, all things considered. I mean, there's no better way, more exciting way to end a show like Total Fantasy Knockout other than trying to overthrow the king, if we're being honest. I didn't see it coming, but now that I have seen it coming, in hindsight, this was the only way that it could probably go. It's actually also pretty funny to see how many times they've actually upped the ante with the almost Pop Team Epic meme faces and just the characters and how they can respond. I love the response in this episode when they all were freaking out about Jingoji kind of pushing back against a princess. One, knowing what Jingoji is capable of, but also two, knowing that she's royalty, and, you know, which one do you actually want to support in that moment? There's just so many times the characters are beyond dumbfounded. They almost create a new look for themselves, and just the fact that we are so late into this anime, and the fact that they definitely reuse certain reactions, but yet they still find new ways to create new ones for the absurdity. Almost like, you know, there's nothing that we can glance at from previous anime, from previous shots we've even used. We need a new face for this reaction because this situation deserves something unique for the insanity that we're actually experiencing. So I just realized I forgot to mention this in the initial recording, so I wanted to make a second part right here. The idea of Shen just like randomly popping up underneath the floor was one of the funniest things, in my opinion, out of the 9 episodes. It's something so in character for him to just so casually be popped up in that moment, but at the same time, it was completely unexpected as well, and just seeing the response of how accepting they were of the bullshit that they were seeing, and how casually he can go about his day even though he's like underneath a slab of stone. That's the type of stuff I love about the characters, and how they just are so unexpected yet so in character all at the same time. I mean, I've said it for a couple of videos where I was like, you know what, after seeing some of the absurd shit that I've seen, this might be like my go-to comedy anime, might even be my favorite comedy anime. And honestly, at this point, I'm pretty safe in saying that it is. I just love the idea that there's an actual story, and even when it's not making me bust out laughing, rolling on the floor, needing to catch my breath, it's always so humorous, and it plays with tropes and gimmicks I see time and time again. And the princess is without doubt one of the most memorable characters we've seen in this show, and for being so deep into the episodes, having wannabe Kirito, having Shen of all characters, like, there's been so many amazing side characters, and the princess, immediately from almost minute 1, given the fact that she was almost already ready to jump. She's memorable, she's frightening, she's at times wholesome. She very much has the representation of every anime character trait, and you don't want to get on her bad side, unless of course you're Juniku, because then you'll just breathe fire in her face and say, "Get the hell out of here, you're no match for me, little girl." I am interested though, because I would be very curious to see, because right now with the way they're directing the king and the princess with Jingoji as well as Tachibana, it very much is that divide in how they both kind of treat each other the same way. And you could very much see a potential, like, you know, way down the line, you know, if Jingoji was still too overprotective, Tachibana revolting in a similar fashion. So I'm curious if they're gonna go the route of like Tachibana and Jingoji make up and maybe he gives her a bit more freedom, and if in return that lets the king kind of do the same thing for the princess, and then maybe they'll agree to go on an adventure. I'm not sure. There could be very like a quote-unquote emotional way to wrap it up, but then most likely they'll find a way to add in that comedy flair just so we don't get too content with things appearing a little too normal. But this was an amazing episode. The map of the world being a woman, the king and the way his followers look to the princess and everything like that. This show's amazing. I love it. It's definitely my favorite comedy anime with a damn good story, if I'm being honest. But thoughts, feelings, if you have any favorite moment, what do you think is going to happen with this revolution? Leave a like if you enjoy and subscribe if you're new around here. Till next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.